If you clicked this video, chances are you've always dreamed of starting a business. You know it could bring you to the financial success you dream of, so you watch videos on YouTube, maybe you subscribe to Gary Vee on TikTok, but for whatever reason, you still haven't started that business. Listen, I get it. Starting a business can be complicated, and there are a lot of steps that seem overwhelming at first. So in this video, I'm going to remove your excuses. I'm going to give you 5 dead simple steps that you can use to start a business this weekend if you wanted to. Starting a business changed my life, and I genuinely believe anyone can do it. Now, if you're new here, my name is Muh-ky-uh. I've been building businesses from small businesses to large startups for the last 15 years, and I'm making videos just like this every week to teach aspiring entrepreneurs like you how to get started. So the first thing you want to do if you're thinking about starting a business is you need to pick a market. And market choice is one of the most important factors in your success. Now, when it comes to picking markets, I particularly like old markets. Markets that don't have a bunch of new tech, that haven't been disrupted. Markets that are old, large, and kind of stagnant. People are not happy with the status quo. 2 examples would be Uber, i.e. taxis. Not fun, no one likes hailing a taxi, you sometimes have to wait in the rain. Uber changed all that. Press a button, the taxi shows up. And DoorDash, same thing. You used to have to call, order the food, maybe it gets delivered, maybe it doesn't. It's a complicated process. Now you just press a button on your phone, your food gets delivered. Both multi-billion-dollar companies started by just looking at old markets and saying, what can I do better? Now, on top of just old markets, I also like markets that are changing. You see, changing markets are really what create windows of opportunity to create entrepreneurial businesses. Example, Amazon. When Amazon was getting started, Jeff Bezos' key insight was that the percentage of people connected to the internet was growing nearly 1,000% year over year. And so he knew if he just started a business selling things online, the wave of momentum would naturally bring his business to be very large and successful. Another example is the App Store. When the App Store first came out, all of a sudden you saw tons of apps going for multi-billion-dollar sales. You had WhatsApp, Instagram. All these companies took advantage of internet-connected devices with an app store that they could download apps and build their business. So you're looking for things that are changing and evolving. If there's nothing moving in your market and there's just absolute stagnation, there can be opportunity, but usually you want some sort of consumer preference changing, some technological advancement, or something that's allowing you to actually build a business off of that change. Now, one caveat to all this, one thing I do not like is what I'll call hype markets. Hype markets would be NFTs in 2021, or maybe it's these days generative AI. There will always be different markets that are sort of hypey, catching all the headlines and things like that. You can go enter these markets, but here's the problem. If you're a startup, VCs are pouring money into these categories, which means you don't have 1 or 2 competitors. You might have 30, 50 smart kids just like you doing the exact same business with all the same funding, if not more funding. And what basically happens is the folks who raise from the largest VCs get the largest checks and they sort of steamroll the market. But at the end of the day, it's really not a good outcome for anyone, because what happens is all of that competitive pressure forces down prices. And so no one really wins in hype markets. Everyone just takes a little bit of a slice of the pie and they go from there. So if you're just starting out, I would say maybe stay away from hype markets and instead look to old markets that are really stagnant but have some change happening. Frankly, this is where most of the billion-dollar companies are formed, and you're better off playing in that arena. Now, once you know what market you want to play in, you need to start building your product, or at least your product idea. And to do this, you simply need to find what are the top problems in my market and what are potential solutions. This is where a lot of people get tripped up. They try to build products that address medium-level pain problems in the market. The challenge with this is if you are not one of the top 3, or ideally the number 1 thing that someone feels pain about in their market, then you're probably not going to have a chance of actually getting them to switch. So sure, maybe it's a little painful the way it's always been done, but it's too much switching costs. They already like the way they're doing it, so they won't use your product. So you really need to understand what are the top pain points in your market, and then start going from there and think about what solutions you could build. Now, you also need to do competitor research. Competitors on the surface are not a bad thing. In fact, I like to see some competitors in a market because it shows me that there's something there. I'm not just an idiot in a room thinking that there's a market and really no one believes it. But if there are too many competitors or too well-funded competitors, that could be a sign that it's a little crowded. Maybe it's like these hype markets I talked about earlier. It's just not somewhere I like to play, and it's not something I would recommend to beginners. Once you figure out problems in the market, you're going to move to step 3, which is to start to list the assumptions you have about your market and your problem. So at a high level, you probably have kind of a couple different assumptions. One is people don't like the status quo. Okay, why don't they like it? Using the Uber example, people don't like taxis. Well, why don't they like taxis? 1, lack of transparency. They never know how much a taxi will actually cost. 2, they hate waiting. Sometimes you have to wait or walk multiple blocks to find a taxi. 3, taxis don't really work well outside of major cities. So if you're in the suburbs or just need a ride, it's not very easy to call a taxi. You have to phone them up, hope they come. It could be 45 minutes, an hour. It's not a convenient process. But these are all assumptions. And so what you need to do is actually write out what are your assumptions. Do not assume that they are true until they are tested. And then you also have assumptions about the product or service that you want to build. You're assuming people will like it. You're assuming people will use it. But why? Write out specifically why you think people will like your version of the solution and make those in your assumption list as well. Now, step 4, you need to actually go out and test those assumptions. And this means talking to your target audience. So if you're selling to B2B software companies, then you go talk to B2B software companies. Ideally, the buyer at a B2B software company that would be buying your product or service. If you're making a mobile app for Gen Z and it's a social media thing, go to college campuses, go find Gen Z people, interview them and say, hey, I have this idea, what do you think? Do you like this? Do you not like this? You need to actually validate your assumptions. And when you're validating your assumptions, a key concept that I like to think about is testing forests, not trees. So testing forests is like testing large general concepts. Going back to my Uber example, hey, do you like taxis or do you find them frustrating? Okay. Do you find them frustrating for this specific reason? That's like a large general concept of people don't like taxis, here's why, and here's how we can solve it. Testing trees, or as you go down the example, branches and leaves would be, hey, I have this app where you can call a taxi in 30 seconds. Do you think this button in the bottom right that says call taxi should be black, yellow, or blue? That sort of testing is basically a waste of time. You can do that later when you have millions of users, but in the early stage, you need to be testing large concepts. And during this process, you may find that, you missed the mark. Either your market's not hungry for a new solution, your solution is not fitting, or just something's not clicking with your target audience. That's totally fine. It happens all the time. All you do is you just go back up the steps. So maybe you go back to step 3 and you come up with some new assumptions. Maybe you go back to step 2 and new problems, or nothing's working. Let's go back to step 1. Let's pick an entirely new market. It's totally fine. When I was building Prodigy, we went through hundreds of markets and wrote down all of our assumptions, tested them rigorously until we landed on our market. Now, step 5, the fun part, you actually get to build what's called an MVP, i.e. a minimal viable product, and launch your business. So a few tips about building an MVP and getting out to the market. Your goal should be speed, not quality. So you want to shrink the time to actually get into market as much as possible, also reducing cost. The worst thing you can do is spend tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars building the next killer mobile app, and you launch it and it totally flops. The reality is, even though you tested your assumptions in step 4, people don't always know what they want until you get it in front of them. So you need to actually build something. There's a famous quote where if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you launch too late. And this is absolutely true. You should launch something almost embarrassingly janky just to get it into your market, get people trying it, and that's where you get the real feedback. And then you'll know if you're onto something. And if you're a beginner entrepreneur, it's more important than ever to really launch quickly and launch cheaply. You don't want to overinvest here because you need money to iterate to actually land on something you can scale. At Prodigy, we used to have a value. Everyone hated it. I came up with it. The phrasing's not great, but it hits the point perfectly. We called it ship lean, learn fast. And we had this value because what we'd find is that oftentimes we'd spend way too much time speccing out the product, getting everything just right, the perfect screens, and we'd launch it and our customers would never use it or they wouldn't buy it. And so we were really over-investing in R&D and not investing in actually getting feedback from the market once we were live. And so we started shipping products earlier and earlier, and that's when things really took off for us. So your goal is to build an MVP and launch it as fast as possible. Now, if you're just getting started, you're starting to build this business, maybe the next step is to go get angel investors. But the question is, where do you find them? Finding angel investors can be very challenging. But luckily for you, I just filmed a video on how to find angel investors, and I'll show you my exact step-by-step process on how I raised over $1 million from angel investors. Just click the video link over here, and I'll see you there.